Hello there, Sergeant Magi here in southeast Queensland, Australia, and welcome to another video on the V Strom 250. Mrs. Magi is kindly making an appearance in this video because today is the big test for the little V Strom. We're going to see what the Sport Adventure Tourer is like carrying a pillion passenger, or two up as they say. The Suzuki is only equipped with a 25 horsepower motor, so clearly it's not designed for full-on two-up touring. So is it going to be? Or maybe? As always, stay tuned to find out.
People who follow the channel will know my previous two videos have highlighted the Suzuki's strengths, its frugality, smoothness, comfort, fuel economy and a range of over 600 kilometres on a full tank. Though this last point may be up for review, we'll look further into that in this video. It's been a challenging time since posting my last video, what with COVID and the floods, so I'm back with some more content and I hope this one will have been worth the wait. We're going to do the testing in two parts. We'll start the V Strom 2-up riding close to home first on suburban roads to see how realistic and safe it is. If that feels okay, then we'll continue the testing further afield. As always, this too will be an honest review. You'll hear the good, the bad, and if indicated, the ugly too.
I'm expecting today's video to be something of a challenge for the little Suzuki due to the effect a pillion will have on the already limited power to weight ratios. To put this in perspective, here are the power to weight ratios of the two bikes I currently own. Firstly, a 2019 Suzuki DL V Strom 250 and a Yamaha FZ6S 2008 model.
Both bikes weigh the same now the V Strom has a centre stand fitted. One is 250cc, the other 600. Looking at the numbers here, we can see that the Suzuki's power to weight ratio with no rider at all is still less than half that of the Yamaha with both a rider and a pillion on board. And the Yamaha has still 3 times the Suzuki's torque. On the other hand, it's no good the Yamaha being able to maintain 150 km an hour up a long steep hill if the speed limit is 80 km per hour. For us, it may be more a question of, is the Suzuki's 25 horsepower enough to be able to maintain the signed speed limits whilst not holding up other road users? I guess the question depends to some degree on your perspective. So, if the V Strom 250 can only keep up reasonably with traffic and remain safe during all the challenges presented in this video, we'll call that a win. A couple of ergonomics points first, and these aren't really any fault of the bike. Firstly, with the top box and panniers in situ, it's not the easiest bike for a pillion to clamber onto. The rider, being a lot further forward, has no issues getting on, but the pillion has to articulate knees, hips and ankles through interesting angles to become comfortably seated. Mrs. Magi also notes that the Givi top box hinge protrudes uncomfortably into her back, so if we go ahead with a longer trip, it will be without the top box. The panniers were fine with no similar issues. Setting off for the first time 2-up into a nearby quiet estate, the V Strom was smooth and comfortable as expected. It felt surprisingly sprightly at 40 to 50 km per hour on this good quality road surface. The bike was also well poised, particularly so in tight slow speed manoeuvres such as these small roundabouts. But it soon became apparent that the real estate for 2 pairs of feet was a little lacking. The rider and passenger pegs are closer together than on some other bikes, and with my size 12 feet, this became most obvious when changing gear. The dreaded traffic lights, which I've spoken about before, were in our favour for once, as the road speeds increased slightly. We nipped out in front of this 4x4 and caravan combo up the hill into a 70 km/h section. To my surprise, the V Strom climbed easily through the gears with only modest throttle inputs, even keeping up with this Harley Davidson. This being a public holiday and also a regular police speed check zone, we were careful not to overcook it here. This aside, the dickheadery demonstrated by this driver shows once again that the cops are never around when they're needed. Anyway, back to the review. On these suburban roads, we were even able to short shift the gears, as we were easily keeping up with traffic. Fallout from the recent flooding is still evident here, where this creek flooded the road after some incredible rain. Ironically, this suburb of Brisbane, Kalanga, translated from the indigenous name, means a very dry place. Heading along Anzac Avenue, another strictly policed 60 km/h zone, and rightly so, we were running next to a real sport adventure tourer, the BMW GS. Shortly afterwards, we head down to the local boat ramp for a look out over the sea and conclude this part of the trial. Just before the boat ramp on our right is Osprey House, named after the fish-eating birds of prey that nest here. This Moreton Bay Council facility, set amongst the mangrove trees, as the name suggests, enables the public to keep an eye on the local osprey family. Their man-made lofty nest platform was erected after their old nesting tree was brought down in a storm. The new nest site comes complete with HD camera. You can now follow their progress on video, both at the facility and online. It is staffed by friendly, knowledgeable volunteers, and well worth checking out if you're ever in Brisbane. Again at the boat ramp, another U-turn shows the balance and composure of the V Strom's 2-up slow-speed stability. Glad we got that one right. The brakes are good, not blistering when applied, but feel adequate and safe. The suspension wallows a bit on bumpy corners, but bear in mind the built to a budget 250 is carrying a payload of more than 140 kilograms and is never going to feel plush and BMW GS-like. My other potential concern is the bike's poor power-to-weight ratio and how this may play out at higher speeds. Other than that, the little Suzuki performed better than I expected so far.
All in all, that seemed to go okay. So with that, we're going to set out on a route that I chose specifically for challenging the little V Strom 2-up. After a successful local 2-up trial, the fuel tank was again filled to the safe maximum before heading out as if we were touring for real. At the same time, the odometer and economy readings were reset to 0. We already have a baseline fuel economy on this bike from the last video, and I thought it worthwhile comparing this with the 2-up economy to see what difference a pillion makes. The second proposed part of this testing is a round trip of about 140 kilometres measured on Google Maps. It takes in 50% motorway, 50% A roads. The uphill highway entry leads onto a 3-lane 35 kilometre stretch of 100 km/h highway. Later this turns into a 2-lane 110 km zone. Finally, the road climbs the reasonably steep range from Landsborough up to the country village of Milan. The latter part particularly will be a challenge for the bike. Nevertheless, challenge it we shall. That's the route described. Let's see how the bike actually handles it. It's only a short distance from home to the highway proper. Our journey begins at the North Lakes highway on-ramp. In my last video, you got how far? Where we got an indicated 615.9 kilometres on the tank of fuel,
I got a great question from a gentleman called John Rocker. He asked if the distance achieved on the full tank in that video was measured on the bike clock or calculated via a more accurate method. I had to concede that it was the former. I had allowed the bike to measure the range knowing the speedometer overreads, but without considering the accuracy of the odometer. Thus, there may be some doubt over this figure of 615.9 kilometers we arrived at in terms of the true range.
So thanks again, John, for the question. In response to this, I'll consider the odometer accuracy after this next trip. We'll let the V Strom measure the distance again whilst strictly following the Google Maps route of known length, both there and back again. We'll have to take Google on trust in terms of its accuracy because I don't have a better index at hand. At the end of the ride, we'll compare the odometer reading with the Google Maps distance and consider if a revision is indicated regarding the claimed touring range of the V Strom in the last video.
Returning to today's testing, we're now at the Caboolture exit, where we lose the third lane and shortly after the speed limit increases to 110 km per hour. We simply can't maintain this speed for any length of time on the V Strom. It's just too low geared, resulting in excessively high engine speeds. However, we continue to maintain an indicated 100 km per hour to reduce the speed differential between us and other road users. Confining ourselves to the inside lane and feeling a little exposed, we continue until we reach our exit from the Bruce Highway at Steve Irwin Way, where the A Road section begins. This road was renamed Steve Irwin Way on the 27th of September 2006 after the late great Crocodile Man himself. We'll shortly ride past the Australia Zoo a few kilometres down this very road. I met Steve briefly during my first visit to the zoo shortly before his death, and I'll never forget the occasion. His many escapades on video showing Australia's vast wilderness and amazing wildlife were amongst the main reasons I was attracted from the UK that same year. Steve Irwin Way is mostly an 80 km per hour zone with some 60 km sections through townships. We leave this road at Landsborough. Milan's altitude of 375 metres above sea level compared with Milan's at 50 metres means a vertical climb of some 325 metres, but in fact this route takes in over 400 metres of ascent, as this climb also contains some short downhill sections too. Landsborough is about 15 kilometres from Milan. Almost 3 kilometres of this road is steeper in incline than 5%. Just over 1 kilometre is steeper than 10%, and a much shorter 330 metre section is steeper than 15%. This may be the main challenge for our laden 250. The climb to Milan begins in a 60 km an hour zone shortly before turning into an 80, so it's not possible to take a run at the hill. We'll have to accelerate up it.
Leaving Landsborough, we set off in a 60 km an hour zone, climbing gently. Milan is now some 13 kilometres away. At 5,000 revs in 5th gear we approach the 80 km/h zone as the modest climb continues. We're using about half throttle to increase our speed to just over an indicated 80 km/h. The small engine's now sitting around 7,000 revs. Power and torque are therefore up and the bike's happy at this speed and gradient. We're able to select 6th gear for a short time. Around the next corner, the longest and most challenging section of the climb begins. As we enter this turn, the gradient increases noticeably, scrubbing off some of our speed, and we select 5th gear. At the same time, visible through the gaps in the oncoming traffic, we see a stationary black car that is potentially blocking our progress. The hard shoulder where we are located currently being too narrow for the car to park safely. Not wanting to round the corner and potentially have to apply the brakes abruptly too up, we're backing off the throttle, losing more speed and momentum. Unsighted until exiting the bend, we realise too late that the hard shoulder is now easily able to accommodate the car. Immediately, we apply full power for the first time in this trip. We probably should have selected 4th gear here too, but we didn't, instead choosing to hold full power for about 25 seconds, whilst moving left into the slow lane. Slowly, the bogged down engine recovers until the V Strom regains its cruising speed during this 12% climb. Selecting 4th gear here would help us recover the speed sooner and would not allow cars to catch up. After a short easing in the gradient and a brief sojourn into 6th gear, again the 12% gradient resumes and we return to 5th gear, this time building some additional inertia in preparation for the steepest section. Now we have the opposite problem whereby the cars are slowing us down. In response, we try to maintain a safe distance from the blue Ford whilst maintaining engine and road speed. At 7,000 revs in 5th at this gradient, we're still able to accelerate without difficulty, the little V Strom even having some reserve. As we gain height, so the gusty wind blowing from our right hand side increases. The prevailing wind effect, exacerbated by the oncoming traffic, was moving the bike around quite a bit, despite its weight. The prolonged and heavy rain we had recently across the southeast has taken its toll on the roads, and particularly the range here. With all this, and being two up on a low powered bike, we're being careful and taking it steady. The most challenging part of this climb now under our belt, we're looking forward to arriving at Milan for refreshments. I will say here though, that had we not backed off the power due to the stationary car, then the little sport adventure tourer would have been able to maintain the signed road speeds throughout the entire climb, 2 up. Arriving at Milan, a bustling and friendly rural town of about 4,000 people, and it looks like they're all here today, we climbed the steep main street towards our destination, looking for a parking space. We're really lucky today and scored a park right outside our planned destination. Milan is a really interesting little town. It has galleries, book and craft stores, an abundance of cafes and restaurants, and lots more besides. So it's a great place to visit in the hotter months. There are also some great views to be had of the Glasshouse Mountains from Mary King Cross Park. After lunch, we get ready to head back down the range, the final challenge of today's trip. The gusty wind has really ramped up as we pick our way over the more elevated and exposed section as we head to the beginning of the descent, back down to Landsborough. With the afternoon sun now behind us, we can better see the road damage from the recent rain, and with the increased wind, we took it extra steady. Approaching the first steep section of the descent, we back off the throttle in case we start to pick up speed. But the low gearing holds back the V Strom nicely until the increasing gradient necessitates small inputs from both brakes, though no more than 4 or 5 of these are required. The little Suzuki feels planted, safe and stable, almost like we're on a bigger bike. Mrs. Magi's textile trousers don't grip the seat material too well. She has to hold herself back using the pillion grab handles during the descent, particularly under braking. Apart from this, there were no other issues descending the range. As shown earlier, today's planned route according to Google Maps was 139 kilometres exactly, and you saw we were lucky to get a parking space right outside our destination, the Dawat Indian restaurant. This means that no additional kilometres were added to the trip that might have needed to be adjusted for later. At the conclusion of the trip, the V Strom's odometer recorded a staggering 139.1 kilometre, right on the money. Obviously, this comparison of the two measurements is over no great distance, on one occasion and with my specific motorcycle, but it does demonstrate that the odometer doesn't suffer a similar problem affecting the speedometer, which overreads. We can now therefore answer John's earlier question conclusively, with a good degree of confidence, that no downward revision of the V Strom's range is indicated. In my previous video, you got how far? We actually did get a genuine 615.9 kilometres in our range test, full to empty. Fuel economy is all about throttle inputs. In the previous video with no pillion, I got 36.5 kilometres per litre or 2.7 litres per 100 kilometre from a full tank. In this video, riding 2 up, we got 31.7 kilometres per litre or 3.15 litres per 100 kilometres over the same riding style, that being keeping up with the flow of traffic. For simplicity and consistency here, both fuel economies from this and the previous video were each calculated by Suzuki's onboard computer. Carrying a pillion passenger only cost an additional 15% in fuel in this trip, so with the empiricals out of the way, it's time for the subjectives. How did the second part of the trip go then? Let's start with the negatives first. Well, the gearing still felt too low, even 2 up, but this did help with getting the bike up to speed acceptably quickly. Also, having 6 gears across a maximum cruising speed of only 100 km per hour means you have relatively close gear ratios, so when you need to downshift, you're back in the power immediately without losing too much speed. An indicated 100 km per hour is really all this bike can comfortably manage for any distance, and in truth this will be only 90 to 95 km when GPS measured, due to the optimistic speedometer. In many ways, 2 up on the V Strom was the same as 2 up on any other bike, in that you have to think ahead a little more than riding solo. Yes, the bike does accelerate a little slower, but it surprised me how slight this was. At no time did the riding experience feel ponderous or tedious. The ride quality in part 2 of the testing was better than expected compared with the initial ride in the suburbs, and once up to speed, you really didn't notice the pillion much at all. The extra weight didn't adversely affect the stability or manageability so far as I could tell. The suspension coped admirably in all but the bumpiest of corners. We felt relatively safe on the highway, but extra care was needed to navigate traffic joining the highway compared with being on a bigger bike, where you would normally move over one lane and maintain or even increase your speed. The V Strom was both comfortable and roomy, except for the footroom department. Both Mrs. Magi and I arrived both there and back again with minimal fatigue. So this video was all about whether the V Strom 250 is capable of 2-up touring, and is that what we did today? Well, probably not for either, in the truest sense of the word. Touring usually includes days, if not weeks, of high-speed mile munching, which we have demonstrated that the V Strom 250 can't maintain. There was also the little incident with the stationary car whilst we were climbing the range. A bigger bike would have dealt with this issue much more easily. The crux of our question hinges on the 2 words high speed. On mile munching though, if you were to plan your more leisurely touring largely on A roads and less so on long motorway stretches, the little adventure tourer would be a blast, safely carrying 2 people and carrying them a good distance too, something around 475 kilometres before the last fuel warning. of around 2 litres remaining based on today's trip data. But was what we did today enjoyable? Absolutely. Was it spoiled in any way because of the power to weight ratio? Not at all. The V Strom was impressive. It was a cheap, fun day out. We spent more on lunch than we did on fuel, and we learned something along the way. The V Strom is such an enjoyable bike that it occurred to me while making this video that I haven't been out on the Yamaha FZ6S at all since getting the V Strom almost a year ago. Overall then, the little V Strom has shown itself capable of carrying two safely and comfortably on different types of roads with the aforementioned caveats. It could therefore be an only bike. If you enjoy videos about the V Strom 250, check out my YouTube friend Adrian's channel, Transylvanian Rider, for more adventure, off-road and two-up videos on this same bike model. I'll put a link in the description. Finally, a big thank you to Mrs. Magi for making this video possible. Thanks all for watching and see you in the next one. See you now.